Hello, welcome back to the Grape Explorer. Hope you're all keeping well. Today we're going to be taking a little look into what biodynamic farming and biodynamic wines are. If you're new to the channel, welcome. This is the Grape Explorer. We do wine education, product reviews and lots of tastings. So if that's your thing, consider subscribing. Now, traditional winemaking methods date back thousands of years, but the concept of biodynamic farming has actually only been established in the last 100 years. So let's start off by asking ourselves that very question: what is biodynamic wine? The concept of biodynamic wine, and indeed biodynamic farming, predates organic farming by some 20 years. It's based on the 1924 theories of Rudolf Steiner and has been established to be a spiritual, ethical, ecological approach to agriculture, gardens, food production and nutrition, with the idea being that you create a self-sustaining system in the vineyard. And what that means in practice is the whole of the vineyard and the winemaking processes should be kind of considered a living organism, with all things flowing into one another, creating that perfect environment. Now, with these practices, of course, come some rules that need to be adhered to that would classify you as a biodynamic farmer. These would be things such as ensuring that natural materials, soils and composts only are used to sustain the vineyard. It is forbidden to use chemical fertilizers and pesticides for the sake of soil fertility. It's important that a range of animals live on the soil and fertilize it, creating a rich, fertile environment in which the vines can grow. And biodynamic farming is of course heavily concerned with sustainability and ensuring that the lands that are being farmed are left in as good or as better shape when they were found for future generations. And so what that means in practice is you will often find on these biodynamic vineyards other animal elements that have been introduced. And a really great example would be something like beekeeping. You know, bees are the great pollinators of the world. And so quite often you'll find a lot of beehives are associated with biodynamic vineyards. Now, when it comes to biodynamic farming, one of the more unusual practices is some of the preparations that you have to undergo before you can plant any crops, or perhaps at the beginning of a vineyard cycle. There are a number of different preparations that follow biodynamic principles, and I've just covered these off on this next slide here. Now, they don't all have to be used, but some of them have gained some sort of notoriety over the last few years for being particularly unusual. So if we look at things like cow manure fermented in a cow horn, that cow horn is then buried and overwinters in the soil. The idea being that actually when you retrieve that cow horn from the earth, you're actually then spreading that manure over your vineyards. Other preparations for the ground include things like silica being mixed with rainwater, which can also be packed into a cow's horn. This is buried at the start of the bud burst and goes right through to harvest. And then we've got some other preparations as well. So I'll just cover a couple of these off. You've got the flower heads of the chamomile plant fermented in soil. You've got the use of stinging nettle tea. You've got the juice from various flowers all being used throughout the growing season as ways to fertilize the crops, sticking to those biodynamic principles. The other key component when it comes to farming of this nature is how the planting calendar operates. And under biodynamic principles, your crops are subjected to 4 different types of day. These are flower day, fruit day, leaf day and root day. And each plant component is said to favour particular days in the moon's cycle passing through the constellations. Now, these different types of days, your fruit, your flower, your leaf, your root, are actually associated with the elements earth, wind, fire, water, as well as being associated with the various constellations, you know, Virgo, Taurus, Capricorn, to name a few. And the idea is that on certain days, you will do certain activities in the vineyard. So, for example, if it's a root day and the moon is in a particular position, this might be a good day to plant or fertilise. If it's a fruit day, and again the moon is in a certain position, it's a good idea to perhaps harvest those crops. And that even goes on to after the wine has been bottled. Some biodynamic enthusiasts would have you believe that a fruit day is a better day to open that bottle of wine, get more of the characteristics from that wine. So with the various types of days, along with the preparations and the other principles, this is now becoming a very specific method of managing your vineyard. Now, let's say we do have one of those fruit days, which may be one of the best times to harvest the fruit. We're then, of course, going to take it into the winery, where again, biodynamic principles ensure that certain practices are followed. And I thought the best way that I could illustrate this would be to give you an idea about how biodynamic wine compares to conventional winemaking. So as you can see, when it comes to the use of sulfur dioxide, sulfates in the wine, under EU law for conventional winemaking, any wine containing 10 milligrams per litre or more needs to be labelled as containing sulfites, and there are maximum permitted levels of sulfites that are permissible in those wines. Again, I'm referring to EU law here. Whereas when it comes to biodynamic wine, the permitted levels of sulfites by the biodynamic certification body, known as Demeter, actually ensure that lower use of sulfur dioxide is used in the wines. And what biodynamic wineries are trying to do at all times is to keep those sulfites to a minimum. There are then further differences that you'll notice between conventional and biodynamic. For example, the use of yeasts. In a biodynamic wine, only wild yeasts from the vineyard can be used for fermentation. Conventional winemaking allows for commercially produced yeasts. There are no fermentation aids allowed to be used in biodynamic wine, when the use of any fermentation aid is permitted in conventional winemaking. And finally, stabilisation in conventional winemaking can be done in a number of different ways. However, when it comes to biodynamic wine, the only process allowed is bentonite for hot and cream of tartar for cold stabilisation. So again, pretty dogmatic in its approach, ensuring that specifics are followed to create the wine. Now, what's interesting when it comes to biodynamic wine, I find, particularly if you're going to go out and try and find some in the shops, is of course it doesn't necessarily have to label itself as such. And so it's a good idea for you to do a little bit of research to understand if the wine producer you're looking to buy some wines from are biodynamic or not. You can do that in many ways, of course. But what I thought I would do is just list a few of the producers that I am aware of globally who do produce biodynamic wines, even if they're not actually labelling them as such. So I've tried to come up with some examples on both sides of the Atlantic that I was able to find. I'm going to start with Albury Vineyards. They're based in England, but as you can see, we've got some in France, Germany, and a number in the United States as well. So definitely some names to commit to memory and to look out for. Now, the big question, of course, is whether or not biodynamic wine tastes different to traditional, conventional methods of winemaking. And the answer here really would be not necessarily. You're not necessarily going to notice a particular difference. Some would say, for example, that the fruit characters can be enhanced by biodynamic wine, but we all know that beautiful wines are made the world over in conventional methods. But I do like the idea of biodynamic wine as a way of creating a sustainable vineyard, very environmentally friendly, very much a chemical-free approach to winemaking. And this idea that the vineyards have got other animals thriving within, as well as wildflowers growing and all sorts of different wildlife, I just think creates a really beautiful picture of a vineyard when you conjure up an image of a vineyard in your mind. I hope this was a useful walkthrough of what biodynamic wine is all about. I myself have had a few bottles in the past. You know, it's not always something that I would deliberately go out of my way to look for. But if I do see any bottles in the future, I'll probably pick them out to see, you know, just how they are, how they were created. It's definitely a very interesting topic to me. Let me know your comments down below around what you think of biodynamic wine. I'm the Grape Explorer. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Cheers.